One time.
What's up guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're playing some more 2-4 with a starting stack of 300. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe, especially turning on the notification bell as you'll not miss any future uploads. Let's get into it.
Welcome back guys, it's been a while but the videos are now back. I thoroughly enjoyed my time in Las Vegas, training up Daniel Negreanu and some heads up, but now I'm back where my priorities lie, getting vlog footage for you all. This session starts 5-handed, we pick up ace-9 offsuit under the gun, it's good enough to open with so we make it $15. We only get one caller and it's the small blind, a player called Fez. I'm gonna start using the names of the people I play with, hopefully so you can all get to know them better and can laugh at some of their questionable plays. In position to a flop, which comes 9, 10, 4, 2 clubs. One thing to note is Fez isn't as experienced as many players at the table and is pretty unpredictable at times. He can play extremely loose, so he can have cards that you just wouldn't expect a normal player to have in certain situations. With that being said, this board texture pretty much misses my overall range, favouring the small blind's range much more here. But for my actual hand, it's a really good flop to be honest. I'm ahead of a large percentage of the time. For that reason, when the small blind checks, I decide to protect my middle pair, sizing down to $10, to which the small blind makes the call. Off to a turn, which comes the ace of clubs. Obviously a great card for our hand as well as our range, so even if I did have a hand like king queen, I'd still be betting this turn all of the time as a bluff to balance my frequencies. When the small blind checks once again, I decide against sizing up, hoping that club draws will call, as well as some one pair holdings that may not call a larger bet. I bet 20, and after a small period of thinking, the small blind raises it up to 80. I actually really like this raise sizing, it's large enough to put me in a difficult spot with draws and some other holdings. My hand is just a bit too strong to fold. He could have some flushes, a couple sets, although we block some of them, but there are definitely many strong hands that beat us here. In a casino game, I could think about folding either here or the river, because our opponent would just be representing these strong holdings. But considering the looseness of the game I'm in, it's just a slam dunk call. I think re-raising would be overplaying my 2-pair hand, so I just make the call. The river comes the ace of spades. Wow. Yeah, we just have the nuts, not a big deal. The small blind leads for 40, and this kind of seems like a blocker bet. He's not getting off this cheaply. He has about 200 left in his stack, and there's nothing other to do than rip it in. Our opponent now says he has a flush. What a cooler, we've sucked out on the river, but I know a call is coming now, especially considering this player's playstyle. There's no way he's folding a flush here. We get the good news as he sticks in calling chips. We flip over our full house. Obviously we're good and we win a $600 pot in one of the first hands of the night. In our next hand, we pick up the exact same hand in the big blind, just different suits. Unfortunately I forgot to show the camera, but yeah, believe me on this one. Both the under the gun player and the cutoff limp, and the button raises it up to $14. When the small blind makes the call, I probably should be 3-betting here with high frequency, as calling would submit myself to a family pot most likely. However, my randomization technique picks the lower frequency route, so I just make the call here. Well, as expected, the under the gun and cutoff players both call, so we're 5 ways to the flop. It comes deuce 5 ace rainbow. All in all, a pretty great flop. The problem with holding an ace like mine is it always has kicker issues, but in this scenario it's extremely unlikely anyone has a higher ace, apart from the button who raised pre-flop, as any ace higher than mine should definitely be raising or 3-betting pre-flop. The small blind decides to lead for 15. An extremely weird bet, he's called DJ and I'd usually say he's one of the best at the table. We get into a lot of battles today, so stay tuned. I end up just calling as I have 3 people behind me, including the pre-flop aggressor, but this is a mistake. With my 15 in, the pot size is 100, meaning everyone else gets such good odds to call. I definitely need to be raising, but oh well. By some miracle, the remaining 3 players fold and it's heads up to a turn. The turn comes the 9 of spades, our gin card. We have an extremely disguised 2-pair, and we now beat any other 2-pair holding that may have been previously beating us. When the small blind checks, I can be betting here, but just because I have the board so locked up, as well as there being very little draws, I check back for deception. The river comes the 6 of clubs. Nothing changes except for 7-8 making a straight, although that's extremely unlikely for him to have. When he bets 35, it's way too small, now's the time to pounce. I raise it up to $90, targeting 2-pair combinations, as well as some sticky ace-x. I'd have liked a bit of a larger sizing next time, but 90 should do fine. Our opponent makes the call pretty quickly and flips over. Ace-9 2, definitely wasn't expecting that, but I guess it makes sense apart from the flop bet. We chop this one up. The next hand of the day is a double board bomb pot. Every player puts in $10 pre-flop and we're dealt 2 boards going straight to the flops. They always go huge and this one is no different. We look down at ace-6 of spades in the small blind, which is actually pretty decent for this kind of thing, to be honest. So yeah, let's go to a flop. The flop comes 3-6-3 2 hearts on board 1 and ace-deuce-king 2 hearts on board 2. What a day for hearts, eh? It's 6-handed now, so we gotta be a bit more careful, but when hitting both boards this well, it's always good to try and narrow down the field if possible, because if you're heads up you should have one board 1 at least. I bet 40, to which the under the gun calls, the cutoff calls, and the button min raises it to 80. Well, that did not go according to plan. I almost want to fold here. Having this sort of hand is just the worst 4 ways. There's just such a slim chance I win at showdown, but for such a price I have to call. Under the gun and cutoff both call, so we're going 4 ways to the turns. The turn on board 1 comes the queen of spades and the turn on board 2 comes the 3 of clubs. Well, now it's less likely someone has a 3, but also someone could have had a queen who would now be beating me on board 1. I check, planning to give up, but it ends up checking around to the button, who throws out a tiny bet of $40. Given the passive action from the players involved, it really looks like they're drawing or have weak holdings that I can get them off, so I definitely think a raise could be a valid play here. The issue with my play that I have is the sizing. On the day I raised it to 120, but looking at this pot, this raise is just a joke. If the under the gun and cutoff call this bet of 120, they'd be left with about 150 each for the river, and the button would only have 70 left. Therefore, given the pot sizing, if I want to start raising it up here, I just have to shove for around 270 total, as that's what my opponents have for their effective stacks. Given that there's no real maneuverability, to be honest, with everyone being quite short stacked, maybe the best move here is to fold. However, I do like a play deep stacked. I do raise to 120, the under the gun folds, and unfortunately, as expected, the cutoff and button both make the call. The rivers come the king of hearts on board 1 and the 5 of hearts on board 2. Well, now this is just a terrible situation to be in. I have a marginal holding on both boards. Heads up, it could be okay, but definitely not 3 ways. I check, the cutoff rips it in for 144, it gets snap called by the button who can only put 64 more in, and what do we do now? There's almost no chance we're not beat here. Hearts got there on both boards as well as some straights and overcards, and if the opponents were drawing, they would just check if they'd missed, and bet if they'd hit, and they've bet, so yeah, you can see the situation we're in. I do think I just have to call here though. There's around 950 in the pot, and I only have to put in 144, giving us odds of almost 7 to 1. There's the slight chance they're playing for the same board, so given these odds, I just have to call even though I'm beat almost every single time. Well, the cutoff flips over, queen 10 of hearts, meaning he scoops both boards, sucking out on the river on both occasions. The button shows us a 3, meaning he had the top board locked before the river, and yeah, our play on the turn was actually the right one. We had the best hand on board 2, going to the river, and it's actually just unfortunate our opponent hit one of the 6 cards remaining in the deck. We lose a $1,000 pot. After that unfortunate hand, I reload for 100 more, bringing my stack to roughly 300 again. This particular hand is 4-handed. I wake up in the big blind with 5-6 of diamonds. Mr. Minraise, also known as Ajay, that's his real name if you really want to know, opens to 10 from the button. There's no need to bloat up this pot, especially sitting with 75 big blinds deep only, so I just make the call. Heads up to a flop, which comes 8, 10, 6, 2 diamonds. A dream flop for us. We have a pair plus a flush draw. It also hits our perceived range much more than the button. I check to induce and he bets 10. I can be check raising here and calling here, probably with even frequencies, so after randomizing I raise it up to $30. I must note, during this exact hand, play was going on really quickly. The whole hand took under 2 minutes, maybe around a minute, so I've had to cut the footage together so it's long enough for my explanation. But yeah, Mr. Minraise makes the call and we're off to a turn. It comes the deuce of diamonds. We hit our flush, great. I really should be leading this card after check raising the flop, but I try to make it look like I was bluffing and just check. Unfortunately, the button doesn't buy it, he checks it back, so we're going to a river. The river comes the king of hearts, hitting our opponent's range as opposed to ours, although that doesn't really matter considering our hand strength. I'm torn between checking to trap here or leading, but my thinking is this player is extremely bluffy, my line doesn't really make any sense, and if he has a hand, he's going to bet anyway considering how passive I've played it, so I want to keep all of his bluffs in too. I check to induce, and he bets $30. We're obviously raising here, the question is to what size. I end up on a size of 120, roughly the pot, aiming to get maximum value from 2-pair holdings, 7-9 or some sticky 1 pairs. Well, we get pretty much snapped off, we show our cards, our opponent mucks, later telling us he had 2-pair, and this hand that lasted under 2 minutes, lasted just around a minute actually, makes us reap the rewards of a $600 pot. And now on to probably my favourite hand I've filmed for any of the real life vlogs so far. We're back to 6-handed, I pick up 7-6 suited on the button. The hijack, DJ from before, opens it up to 15. I have a larger stack now, sitting with around a 500 in my stack, and I decide to make a really low frequency play by 3-betting with my hand to $65. The reason behind 3-betting with hands such as these are that the opponent will never put me on these cards, so if we hit the board later we can make some very disguised straights, 2 pairs or even trips. As well as this, 3-betting with this weaker hand will also benefit me when playing with my stronger hands such as aces, etc. As people are more likely to call my 3-bets, knowing that I have the potential to have 7 high some of the time. I do this very rarely in the current game I'm playing in just because the people never really fold to 3-bets, even if they have really weak cards, it's just the table dynamic. I'm also not the most deep stacked, it's preferred to do this when you have more chips. However, one thing is DJ, the player I'm playing against, is more on the tighter side, so if I'm ever going to 3-bet 6-7 suited in this game, now is definitely the time. It's good to mix in on occasion, so that's what I do. The hijack DJ makes the call and we're off to a flop. The flop comes 9-8 deuce rainbow. Pretty dry board texture all things considered, especially in a 3-bet pot. We both shouldn't be having many of these cards if at all. In reality, I flopped an open ender against an opponent who probably has a pretty narrow range, weighted towards the strongest hands in the deck. When he checks to me, I don't want to cap my range checking back. I can still have all the strongest hands such as aces, kings and queens, when he probably can't, so I bet 65. Well, my opponent calls pretty quickly, and one thing that might help you guys out when you're playing poker is that when an opponent calls straight away, a lot of the time it means they have a weak holding, such as a draw or a high card, or maybe a 1 pair that they're not too comfortable with. If they had a really strong holding, they'd more likely take their time as they'd need to decide whether to raise or not. For that reason, I can be quite confident he doesn't have pocket 8s or 9s, something that he could definitely have based on the way he's played. The turn comes the 9 of clubs. The hijack checks and actions on to us. This is where the hand gets really interesting. What hands can he really be holding here? Based off my knowledge of this player, for him to call a 3-bet, I'm assuming he has all pocket pairs above 7s, ace jack and above, and maybe some suited broadways or ace 10 suited. That's the only hands that I'm putting him on. Now what could he call a flop bet with? It wasn't small, it was around half pot, and because he's quite tight and I'm repping such a strong hand, in my opinion, he folds any unpaired hand part of his initial range, except ace king, although I do think he could fold ace king too here on the flop. That leaves us with 7s, which I block, 8s, 9s, of which he'd have a set or quads, or the most likely option of 10s or jacks. There's a small chance he has queens, kings, aces, but it's a small chance. So with a turn bet, what can I realistically get him off? Ace, king and 7s for sure, definitely not 8s, 9s, queens, kings, aces. That leaves us with 10s or jacks, which with the right bet size I believe I can get to fold. In the moment, these were the exact 2 hands I was putting him on. They're the most likely and they could definitely be folded in my opinion. With a second barrel on the turn, I'd realistically be repping queens, kings or aces, or a bluff, so these holdings of 10s or jacks would have an extremely hard time to call. In a casino, I'm confident I could get many folds in this spot, so I'm just hoping DJ is good enough. Yes, you heard that, good enough to fold this hand. My hand is also a very good bluff candidate due to having 8 outs to a straight, which would almost always be good, so even if he calls I might hit something on the river. Here's where the mistakes come in. I bet 160, leaving myself with around 220 behind. This is just a massive mistake. I need to overbet shove here, or at least be putting around pot size, because leaving myself with 220 in a pot, which would almost be 600, leaves no playability, and I'm not even betting that large into the initial pot right now. Betting 160, as I said, is just a massive mistake, and after tanking for a few minutes, I know I'm right with my prediction of 10s or jacks. I can tell from how uncomfortable he is. Unfortunately though, he throws in calling chips and there's just nothing I can do. The river comes the 7 of hearts, it changes absolutely nothing, we brick out. This is where stack management comes into play. It's probably my biggest weakness as a player and it certainly cost me here. If I had 500 behind, or even more, this would be a certain shove as a triple barreled bluff, and I'm confident I could get him off jacks or 10s. He may even have folded the turn, seeing how much I had left behind if I had more. But I'm left with 220, there's just no point shoving, it would give him too good a price to fold. He'd just have to call, even though he'd probably think he was beat. So when he checks, I just check it back, and guess what? He flips over pocket jacks. It was pretty face up to be fair, but yeah, I thought that hand was pretty interesting. After a technical hand, let's move on to more of a dumb one. I look down at king 9 offsuit in the hijack, the cutoff, button and I all limp. The small blind opens to $15, I make the call, so does the cutoff and so does the button. The flop comes king 9 10 2 spades. We've got 2 pair, great flop for us. The small blind leads out for $20, with 2 people behind me I can't call and risk them coming in, so I raise to 65. Well, now the player in the cutoff called Mateo, otherwise known as the tanker, calls. You'll have noticed I haven't been playing many pots with him. He's playing pretty tight at the moment. So yeah, if that wasn't enough warning signs, the small blind snap rips it in for $230. At the time I thought I had to call here, due to the loose nature of the game, but looking back this is just like a clear mistake. Worst case scenario, he has spades, of which I'm pretty much flipping anyway. He could have king 10, a set, a straight. This is just a spot where I have to fold, especially with the tight cutoff player behind me. I do end up making the call however. Luckily the cutoff folds, but we get the bad news, we're up against the nuts, queen jack, and we're gonna need a king or 9 to save us here. Off to a run out, which comes the 7 of hearts, the 10 of hearts on the river, we brick out, and yeah, we played that one really poorly, we deserve to see our chips disappear into the distance.
Free. You win. One more one-time poker video, let's go. two features.
On to the last hand of the night, I've reloaded for another 160 and I limp under the gun with 5-3 suited. The hijack opens to 15, the big blind makes the call and I make the call. The flop comes 5-3 10 2 spades. We hit double pair and the big blind leads for 25. Great situation to be in, I snap raise it up to 60 as I want to get as much money in the pot as possible. The hijack folds and the big blind makes the call. The turn comes the 3 of clubs, we've hit another full house, the board is completely ours. The big blind blocker bets for 15, that can't be happening, we raise it up to 100. Well, the hand gets pretty weird now, he has around 60 behind. If he calls the 100, meaning he has around 160 right now, but he basically outs his hand as spades. This player I'm playing against is called Nick, and he hasn't played as much poker as some of us have, which may explain his action for this hand and basically outing his hand, even though if he calls he'll have some money left on the river, and I believe him, trust me I believe him. After a bit of tanking he actually makes the call with me knowing what he has, so yeah, a bit interesting. The river comes the queen of clubs, and before you all think I can't trust him, in this scenario it was just obvious that spades is what he had, so once he missed his draw he checked. I threw in a value bet of $2, he makes the call, big victory, got some massive value there at the end, and we scooped the last pot of the night.
Thanks for watching guys, it was quite an interesting session. It was actually the first time we've lost on the poker vlog, so yeah, that wasn't good. But we were in for 560, out for 465, meaning we lost a total of around $105. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe, also turning on the notification bell, and yeah, peace.